Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles people who are passionate about what they do for a living, what organization they belong to, or the community they are a part of. Here is your host, Dave Cunningham.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Rob Watkins is back for another conversation. I always learn something new when I sit down with a singer-songwriter. In this episode, we take a look back into Rob's musical journey over the last 40 years, exploring the various bands he's been a part of and his opportunities to collaborate with a couple of Canada's music legends. We also dive deep into his latest release, Blue Sky Thinking, discussing the inspiration behind the songs, the distribution process, and the profound significance of sharing his music and lyrics with the world. This episode was recorded in June of 2024. Rob, welcome back to the podcast.
Glad to be back.
It's good to see you. Now, as we record this conversation on a nice summer day in June of 2024, we have news that you have released a new collection of songs.
Yes.
And the LP is called Blue Sky Thinking. Actually, it's a CD as opposed to an LP, which some people are doing. We'll get to that in a bit, but I thought I would do something a little different. You've been on the show before.
Yes.
And what I wanted to do was involve a mutual friend of ours, Larry Stafford.
Yeah.
And Larry Stafford is a gentleman, for the folks who aren't from Kingston who may be listening to the podcast. He is the son of a gentleman who owned a record store years and years ago. And he got into the habit of saving all kinds of posters and pictures that bands would come into the record store and put up on the wall. So he has a mammoth collection, and what he has done is he has created a Facebook page, and it's called Kingston History of Bands 2020. And so what he has done is he has looked for all kinds of pictures of band people who have played all over the Kingston area in all kinds of genres of music. And I did a search for Rob Watkins.
Oh, my gosh. I bet you that was scary.
The hair is still there.
Yeah, well, a little thin at the top, but it's still hanging on.
What I thought would be interesting to do is to go back and talk about some of the bands you played in, what kind of music you played, when you got into songwriting, and the performing side of things as well. And so the earliest one I could find, and I don't know if it's the earliest, but this is 1979.
Yeah.
Were you in a band before then?
A couple of high school bands that never really amounted to anything, more just get-togethers, and we'd play parties in someone's basement.
So the first one I found was Head First.
That's pretty much the first one, yeah.
So describe that band. What were you doing then?
Cover material, primarily, and anything that was popular at that time, from the 70s. So a lot of cover tunes, so we could get into the bars, play there, and hone our skills. So most of the bands that came from that point on were the same thing. They were cover bands. Mm-hmm. Doing originals, even at that time, was very hard to do those. Although what we managed to do was, especially in Head First, we would sneak a couple of our tunes in. I wrote with a fella called Mark Gray. But we'd always either introduce them as someone else, or this is a Stones song, but you haven't heard it yet. And we'd sneak
It's on an obscure album.
Yeah. And
what kind of music would you be playing back in 1979, 1980?
Oh, boy. We were doing Teenage Head. We were doing the Romantics, Harlequin, a lot of Canadian bands, actually, which was kind of cool. Beatles, Stones, all the classics. So more rock and roll, not heavy metal or anything like that.
Next one I've got on the list is Grip and Lake Trio.
Grip and Lake Trio was actually Lindsay Fellows, who is a music producer. I think he's got his own label down in L.A. now. And that was just a put-together band. They've got a cottage out on Grip and Lake. So he'd invite all his rock star friends and guys from Toronto and such. Tony Kenny, I think, used to come along. And Matt Woodward played with us. Mauro Seppi, who I played with Matt. And we'd just get together and just jam on stage. Same thing, any rock and roll classics that we all knew. Mm-hmm. And, you'd throw a party and that, big bonfire. And
Pull out the guitars and the drums, and away you go.
That's right.
And for those listening who aren't from the area, I thought I would do this because I'm sure that no matter where you live, there are people that you know who are in a band or were in a band and have some kind of experience growing up, continuing to play music as they grow up for all kinds of different reasons. So I thought it'd be interesting to do this. The next one I have is 1983 or so, and I don't know if you call yourselves rock or ROQ.
It was Rock You.
Rock
It was a
You.
little- yeah.
Okay.
And that came from,
Should write it phonetically here.
Yes. Well, I put two umlauts over the O because I thought at that time, someone had told me, I said, well, that changes the O to an ah. And I thought, Rock You. Oh, yeah, that's great. And it'll look great as a logo. It wasn't true. So that was different members. That started in around 82, I think it was, shortly after Head First broke up. That was Mike Cooglin. He was a high school classmate. And Mark Gray was in the band at one point. Same thing. He was a high school student that I knew from Bay Ridge High School. Played a lot of covers, but that was the first band where we said, no, we're sticking to our guns and we're putting originals in every set that we do. You'd do 3 or 4 sets back then. And those were the days where we'd be playing from Wednesday night till sometimes Sunday, matinee thrown in there, while working our daytime jobs. Mm-hmm. Looking back, I'm thinking, I don't know how I did that, but youth.
So how old would you have been when you started writing songs?
Well, it's funny you asked that, Dave, because I actually started doing my memoirs.
Oh.
And that started from Bill Welichka just put out a book of his life. Fascinating. So it was my...
Bill Welichka, by the way, is a TV radio personality here in town.
Yes.
Spent a lot of time working in Toronto.
In Much Music.
In Much Music.
Yeah. And so he put out his book, and my son from my first marriage and my daughter from my recent marriage, they both said, oh, you know what? You got to do that. I was like, well, look, he's a Much Music DJ, and he's known nationally, globally, probably. I said, people know me for being the craft dinner king, so that's a pretty small niche market. But I thought, well, wait a minute, though. I said, you know, they were onto something where they still have a lot of questions that they ask me from time to time about my past, such as you're doing. And I thought, you know what? I've got to jot all this stuff down for them. Mm-hmm. It's for my kids, my grandkids, and beyond that, if someone else wants to read it, that's great. But because my parents died early and I was never able to ask those questions that they're now asking me, I would have loved to have some sort of a journal or some memories jotted down. So I wandered off of this question here. So about the songwriting. So I was actually 8 years old, and this is the first memory I have. As a child, I always had music in my head that I thought it's something I heard on the radio, and I'm just, it's in there. But there was this one particular day where I was sitting with some friends in my backyard in Montreal, and I remember just this music was playing around in my head, and I knew at that moment that I hadn't heard it anywhere. It wasn't on TV, it wasn't from radio, it wasn't from my brother's record collection. This was something of my own. So that's how it started and when it started. And then as I transitioned into a teenager, I had a great English teacher who really got me into poetry. And so he saw my potential and said, you should start writing your own poems. And then 2 things clicked. I said, well, I have this music and I have these poems. That's songwriting. You smash them together and boom.
And hopefully you've got something.
Yeah. So from a young age, and I'm not alone in saying that. I know Bernie Smith, who I play with. We trade stories all the time because he's same thing for him. He was about 8, 9 years old when he said, yeah, I always started with music. I always had music in my head.
Yeah.
So a lot of times it starts or manifests at an early age.
Were you playing instruments that young?
Well, I wanted to be one of the Beatles. So my parents...
Which one?
I wanted to be Paul. I wanted to be Paul so bad. Well, and John. I mean, I always wanted to be the both of them together. So I think I was around that same age, 8, 9, and my parents saw that I had an interest in music, and I begged them. I said, I want to play guitar. Can you get me a guitar? So they said, well, okay, listen, let's have an expert come out. So it was one of these, I think, fly-by-night guys that comes out and tells every parent, your child is a protege.
Yeah.
So this guy says, yeah, you've got great musical aptitude and blah, blah, blah. And he said, so what do you want to do? I said, I want to play guitar. He said, that's great. Here's an accordion. Truthfully, he gave me an accordion. My parents leased it for however long. I think a year I played that. Hated it. Absolutely hated it. But that was my start into playing a musical instrument. And I quickly ditched the accordion and finally convinced my parents I need a bloody guitar.
Let's get back to this list here. We have The Enforcers, White Lies, and Bad Habits in fairly quick succession there.
Yeah.
Differences between them?
Well, The Enforcers was Matt Woodward and Mauro Seppi and myself, and that was right on the heels of Rock You. Matt, both those guys were just music monsters in the Kingston community. So they would come out and see me when I was playing in Rock You, and they wanted a singing bass player. And, well, that's me. And so I made the leap from one group to the other, and it was kind of more, we're still doing the rock and roll classics, more difficult pieces, though. The stuff I'd never played before. So, and I give credit to Matt because he was a great teacher. Taught me a lot, and playing with Mauro, fantastic drummer. We all sang. And then White Lies, first off, The Enforcers was kind of short-lived. I think we were only around for 10 months or something, and then imploded. White Lies was John Bowen, Tito Gervais, as he was known, Jerry, I won't mention his last name, but anyways, and Richard Pichet, who plays in Dead Root Revival right now. I'm dropping names like crazy here. And John Bowen, as I said, the guitarist. And that was very Southern rock, Jason and the Scorchers. It was big, back then at the time, late 80s. Bad Habits, again, went back to just classic rock and roll. But again, in each one of those groups, I always made sure I said, if I'm going to do this, we're playing originals. Not a whole night's worth, but we're slipping them in here and there. And it was more just to see what the reaction was going to be.
Yeah.
How, without the people knowing it was an original, sticking it in the set, amongst all those others, how's it going to fit in and will it go over? And in most cases, it did. So,
And were you writing originals that fit the nature of the music you were playing at the time?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, I was writing a lot of rock and roll stuff. But it fit the bill. So
in the late 80s, you had Cry Wolf and then Delta Rays and the Bogarts.
Yeah. The Bogarts and Cry Wolf, again, were classic rock groups. Same formula. The Delta Rays was more originals than I'd ever done in any group before. So we quickly gained a really big following in Kingston, and that would have been like, I think, 89 through 92 we were together. And we put out 2 albums and really pushed the originals. Now that group, same thing, yes, it was the Anglin brothers and myself. Billy Anglin now plays with Paul Langwell. Steve and Rick Anglin. They're Billy's older brothers. We were actually offered a recording contract right when we broke up. So their parents actually managed us at the time. And we were just trying to work out the deals, and Rick ended up just saying, I've had enough. I gave up university for this, and it's not going my way, and out I go. And at the time, I remember thinking, are you kidding me? This is a golden opportunity. It wasn't a huge record contract. It's a small label out of Toronto, an indie label, but still a recording contract. And, the old rock and roll cliche, it's just he quit. The brothers went with him. There's me on my own. I'm like, okay, now what?
In the mid-1990s, we have the band called Please, and then one whose name I find interesting, Mint Back Jewels.
Yeah.
And let's talk about those two for a sec.
Please was with Debbie Orm, who a female singer this time, which was kind of intriguing. Great singer. She's still Debbie Feely, I think, is what she goes by now, but local artist, a fantastic singer. So that brought a whole different dimension to playing in a band because I never had played with a lead singer, female lead singer rather. The Mintback Jewels, again, a short-lived band. The reason that we broke up was because that was all around the time that I got known as the Kraft Dinner King for eating 10,000 boxes of Kraft Dinner. Well, this was in 95, I believe it was, 96. And every newspaper across Canada and the United States picked up this story that I was the Kraft Dinner King, and I was acknowledged by Kraft Canada, and Much Music was interviewing me, and I was on the Deanie Petty show. David Letterman was calling. I was in the National Enquirer. Like the most bizarre circumstance you can imagine. A fluke, I think. But still, people are still asking me about it today. But that basically took over anything I was doing, any band that I was doing, any tapes that I was putting out, records I was putting out. All that was pushed to the side because now I was the Kraft Dinner King. So you can't, and I felt bad for those guys, because they were stuck sort of behind me, always having to deal with, oh, you're playing with the Kraft, isn't he on TV and the radio? And so think about it, if you're in a band and this one guy is getting all the attention, it's not too long before they say, hey, have a nice life and see you later, pal.
And you didn't write a jingle for Kraft Dinner?
I did.
Or did you?
I did.
Did they use it?
No. Well, I'll give you a little short sample of it, okay? I'm a macaroni addict, haven't had none in a week. I'm going cold turkey, and I hate the sight of meat. I dream of noodles. So when Kraft heard that, they went, absolutely not. Addict and, cold turkey. No, that's not going to work for a jingle. But it's funny because every interview I would do back then, or even Much Music, they always came out to my place. Hey, you got to play that Kraft Dinner song. Oh, great.
It just reinforces the problem.
Yeah.
Since I've known you, I haven't had much of a sense as to you doing a lot of performing. Old Pony is a band that I've heard you play with.
Yep. And
do you do solo gigs or no?
No, not really. I never got into that. I mean, I was always too insecure just to step up on stage. I did a few of them, and I hated them. Mm-hmm. I'm a person that I need bandmates. And the good thing, through all these bands, I mean, I'm sure you're looking and thinking, geez, the guy was in a band like every 2 years. But every time I was with these people, I always told them, I said, look, here's the deal. Friendship first and the band second. Because if it's the other way, it's just not going to work out. It never does, never has. So I made a lot of close connections, a lot of great friends along the way. And that's still paramount to me. So now, I'm at that stage. I just turned 64. And truthfully, up until about December of last year, I was still playing with Old Pony. We've disbanded since. But I'd pretty much given up the game. I said, I think I've had enough, and the phone's not ringing anymore.
The performing thing.
Yeah, the performing thing. And I thought, let's just concentrate solely on recording. We'd had our record contract with Revolver Records, and they got us into the European market. So I was happy doing that.
Yeah.
And then I think it was in December, I got a call from Ken Hall and Cliff Edwards, our mutual friend.
Before you get into that, let me finish this out because I was going to go there.
Okay.
The point is having said all this business about giving up the gig in terms of not wanting to do any more performing, having said all of that, you just did a gig last night, as a matter of fact, the first gig with this new combination of people.
Yeah.
Let's finish off this part of the interview with a discussion of, I can't remember the name of the group.
Ultrasonics. Not with an X, but a CS. Yeah, that's Bob Arledge, Bernie Smith, who I was in a band with in Old Pony, and myself. So just a nice little trio.
What are you playing? What kind?
It's old classics, 1950s, and of course throwing in some originals. So it's sort of a softer roots Americana style, which is what I write now.
So you play some of your own tunes?
Definitely, yeah.
Cool. So we talked about the bands you've been in, the kind of work you've been doing, and you started to talk about this phone call that you got from Ken Hall, who, for the benefit of folks listening from afar, and there are a million different Ken Halls I found, even in this town. But Ken Hall is a musician, plays keyboards, and does an incredible job on keyboards. I've seen him perform several times. And this brings me to the other topic. I can remember seeing you with this show we are going to talk about, which is the one that Cliff Edwards, and some folks may recognize his name. He was in a band called The Bells back in the early 70s and has since done solo work off and on, recorded several albums, but has been the mainstay of music in this area to a certain degree because he continually puts on shows featuring different musicians in the area, and you had the opportunity to play with him at that concert. So tell us about that particular show.
It was the Canadian Songwriters, or Canadian Songwriter Songbook, I believe is what it was called, doing all classic Canadian songwriters music. So, it was back in December of last year where I literally said, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm just going to be a recording artist, and that's it. And I got a call from Ken Hall, who was looking for a bass player. And I said, oh, well, who is it with or for? And he said, well, Cliff Edwards. So my heart kind of stopped because Cliff is one of those icons that I've always, admired and wanted to play with. So truthfully, my first reaction was, why me? I mean, there's far better bass players that you can get. And Ken's response was, he said, Cliff wants a singing bass player. Your name came up, and he wants to give you a shot at it. So I went and auditioned, and again, being the insecure person I am, I thought, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to fail, he's going to fire me on the spot. And he was so cordial, such a great guy, as you know. And I was in. So
this brings up something, because I know you and I have had conversations about your friendship with one of the members of the Stampeders.
Yeah.
Is it Kim?
Yeah, Kim Burley.
Okay. This business of getting to know Kim Burley, the Stampeders were a huge band in Canada, had hits that were big right across North America and I think all over the world for that matter. So you get to develop an association with Kim Burley, and you get to develop a friendship and an association with Cliff Edwards, who are longtime performers who have got a great reputation. You have a certain appreciation for their skills, but how do you feel about that association that you're developing with these people that you've been around?
Again, it's the friendship thing. So I was introduced to Kim through music producer in L.A., Timothy Eaton, who was interested in signing me. So I didn't go that route. And so anyways, short story is that he introduced me to Kim Burley, and we became friends. But truthfully, friends first. Yes, the first phone calls with him, I was over the moon because here's one of my idols. And as I told him, I said, listen, the very first record I ever bought, 45 RPM, was Oh My Lady by the Stampeders. So I said, you don't know what this means to me. All that set aside, I was telling people just about our conversations. I said, if anybody was listening in, they'd say, they just sound like two old geezers talking about their lives, talking about our grandkids and our kids and their wives and daily lives. And that really settled the dust for me. And I saw him as a human being, which is what he is. Doesn't matter if he's him or Paul McCartney, whoever. They're all human beings at the end of the day. So I really cherished that. And Cliff was the same thing. I knew Cliff through Bernie and was introduced to him a couple of years ago. And it's a great friendship. And these two guys are great because not only are they mentors, they're my mentors, they have great advice,
Been there, done that sort of thing.
They've been there, done that, yeah. And explain, the music business has changed over the years. So even though they are my seniors, we have good long chats about songwriting and what to do with it and where to go. And again, it comes down to, they'd always ask me, are you happy with what you're doing? I said, yeah, I'm ecstatic. And I mean, I'm living a teenage dream. My records are being played, okay, overseas. It doesn't matter. We're being played in Belgium and England and in Alaska. We have this one fella, Bill Annis is his name. He spins us every day. Well, I'm pretty happy about that. There's someone actually playing our music. So not a bad deal. But again, I cherish their friendships and their advice. And
it's interesting when you think about musicians that you listen to and appreciate and enjoy. And when you were younger, when we were teenagers, we had musicians we looked up to who may have been somewhere in the range of 10 years older than we are. And then some of these guys are still around on tour. I mean, the classic example is Paul McCartney. Yeah. And the Rolling Stones, who are all over 80 years old, and they're up on stage kicking butt with every concert. I find that amazing. So,
well, look, Cliff is the same age as Paul McCartney.
Yep.
So, and he's still going strong. I mean, the stamina that Cliff has, we just rehearsed before he went on vacation. And Bernie and I were commenting after Cliff left, we went, holy mackerel, he puts us to shame. Cliff has 18 years on me. And he's like the stuff that he does, he's just moving all the time. And it's great. It's great to see that. It's so inspirational.
Let's get to the new album. If anyone opens up Facebook and has your name somewhere in there, you are forever showing up playing a tune. Just you and your guitar sitting on the couch or on the chair and playing a song about whatever topic. These songs that you have put up on Facebook, do they make it to a CD at some particular point, or is that a way of you experimenting with how a song's going to flow?
It's more experimenting, just to see what the response is going to be. So yes, sometimes they do make it to the CD, but other times, they don't. They just kind of float out there. I mean, I'm still a novice when it comes to social media. So my wife handles a lot of that, and Tom as well. But there was a song that is on that album called Listen, which we can probably get to later, but which dealt with mental health. So I wrote it, again, like about a year ago. I felt it was a really strong song, put it on the album. But I wanted to get the message out to different groups, various people. So anyways, on Facebook, I post something and you get a few comments, and I'll always see 20 or 30 people that might comment on it or send me a heart or whatever it is, and that's great. So it was my wife. I posted it at the beginning of the week, and like a day later, she says, wow, that's amazing that you've already got 250 people that have seen this. And I'm going, what are you talking about? There's only 30 people here. She says, no, press on the actual thing. You go here and there's a little eyeball that shows up. And she says, that's how many people have actually watched it. Not everyone has to comment.
Yeah.
I went, so I go there and there's only 250 people. I went, well, that's kind of neat. By the end of that week, we'd had like almost 1,000 people who had seen it. So right there, my thought was, okay, someone's noticing this and they're liking it, and they've looked at it, that's got to be a contender for the album. So I base things kind of off of that, and personal feelings too. If it's a song I feel personally connected to, I'm attaching my name to it, well, I'm going to put it out there.
When you and I have spoken in the past, we've talked about the genre of music that this probably fits into, which is called Americana. Yeah. And Americana is I don't know how you would describe it. It has blues influences, folk, country. It is sort of a slimmed down's the wrong word, but it's quieter than most music that you might be listening to right now.
Oh, yeah.
Very popular in Europe right now.
Very.
But not as popular in North America.
Well, it's not as commercially viable. I mean, you were in radio for many years, so that, advertisers are paying the bills. People want familiarity. So in our Canadian market anyways, what I've found is that there's fewer and fewer stations around now, the bigger college market, but those stations have to play all the classics. That's what people want to hear. And the advertisers are glad about that. So for Americana, that genre, to break into this market in Canada at this time is near impossible. Mm-hmm. But like you say, the European market, especially in the Netherlands and Germany and all that area, it's a huge thing.
And it's music in Canada and the U.S. I think most of the playlists that radio stations work with are playlists provided by a central force, a central office that is programming for multiple stations owned by the same company. So like you say, it's harder and harder to get into that. Whereas I think there's more little pockets in Europe that like to play their own thing.
Yeah. We were just talking to some friends who came out last night to the show, and they were asking about that. And we said, look, let's make no bones about this. These aren't huge radio stations over there. They're more... I mean, we call them college radio stations, but they would be the equivalent to CJAI in Amherst, on Amherst Island. That size. So smaller towers probably, if they even have that over there. Smaller stations, smaller demographics. But if you cluster enough of those together, it amounts to a lot.
Now, the podcast doesn't allow for us to play any of this music on the show, but we can talk about it and we can urge people, well, actually, they can't download this because it's not streaming anywhere.
No, I mean, we've confined ourselves, yes, as for sales. We want it to be heard more than we're interested in making the money.
Yeah.
That's the truth of the matter. But we just found that when we were signed to Revolver Records 5 years ago now, I mean, we had a contract that thick, and you're putting your name to you don't even know what.
Yeah.
So in hindsight, though, I mean, they were doing a lot of things that we didn't necessarily agree with, attaching them, putting them out on YouTube, but attaching them to all these commercials for huge companies who were making all the money. And again, we saw nothing from it.
Yeah.
We didn't make a dime from that deal. We were signed for 3 albums. They released 2. The third one they passed on, but that was because the label manager had changed. So long story short, we just, and seeing it put on all these social platforms, Amazon and Deezer and you name it. The way it worked is that 15, 20 years ago, if we sold 10,000 units, we would have made some money on that. Now, if you sell 1 million or you have 1 million downloads, you're lucky to get a paycheck of a few $100 and maybe $1,000.
Yeah.
So you're moving all these units, but it's the same game. You're getting nothing in return. My point being is that I'd made a decision, and I talked to Tom and I said, listen, I don't want to be on any more of these social platforms. I don't care if it hurts us sales-wise. I'm more interested in getting it heard. So I'd rather know that it's being played on these radio stations. If someone is legitimately interested, they can get in touch with us personally.
Yeah.
And that has a different effect on you. It's not this... I relate to the craft dinner thing. So, pre-social media, I'd get calls of, this one, John Darby was his name. I don't know if you remember him. And he phoned one day and he left a message on my answer machine saying, Rob, I just want you to know that the Kraft Dinner King story is global now. CNN News has picked it up, and you're being seen in Japan and Germany and France and blah, blah, blah. It didn't mean anything to me. Mm-hmm. It was great, but I was still, because it wasn't something tangible, I was like, well, I don't know. And to me, all these sales that people might be getting now through all these social platforms, I don't know. It's like dealing with a ghost.
So if someone wants to listen to the CD, they have to basically get a hold of you and get a copy of it.
Pretty much, yeah. But then we get direct feedback that way.
That's right. But it's restricted to this geographical area.
Yeah.
Let me talk about a couple of songs, because my wife and I sat down and listened to the CD, and she loved it.
Oh, great.
And I think the appeal to this kind of music is that it's, like I said before, it's quieter. You can listen to the lyrics and understand what the person is singing about in the song. Yeah. And you can check out the instrumentation, which there's some really good cuts on here from a musical perspective as well.
But isn't that great to be able to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Summer.
Yeah.
Talk about that particular tune.
It's not about summer. Funny enough, I wrote it last summer, but it was kind of a composite of old girlfriends, when I was in my early 20s and how unstable relationships are at that point. So that was really just a song about a couple of old girlfriends, and they usually blossomed in the summertime and disintegrated very quickly. By the fall, it was like, well, you moved on. So that's a summer. Inspired, obviously, by Here Comes the Sun. I mean, I think a lot of people said, boy, that sounds kind of like the Beatles. Well, yeah, I definitely had George on my wavelength then when writing it. So that's the background on it.
In My World is another one that has a Beatles flavor to it. Now, when I was listening to it, I thought more of Jerry and the Pacemakers.
Yeah. Very early British Invasion.
Yeah, British version. The other song that I like on here is Light the Way.
Okay, yeah.
And just, the combination of your singing and the tune and the instrumentation on it, and that was a good song. I like that one.
Yeah, a lot of DJs have said it's a gospel tune, which when I wrote it, I didn't really write it that way. Lyrically, it kind of comes across that way because, dealing with God. But I was trying to channel like Robert Johnson, that sort of whole blues era of the 1930s.
It's more spiritual than religious.
It is, yeah. But that's a different side to me because I recently wrote a song called God. And I thought, oh boy, is this going to stir up the dirt for sure. And
is it a capital G or a small g?
it's a capital G. But again, it deals with just what you said. It deals with spirituality. Not because as a kid, I mean, I can remember being raised Roman Catholic. Your image of God is perceived as this person, a man first of all, with long flowing white hair. Long flowing white hair and the beard and the robe, and I never bought into that. And I just saw things more spiritually than this. You have to think this way. This is the way it is. And there's heaven and there's hell and here's the rules.
Here's the format.
Here's the format. This isn't a game.
Yeah.
And I just looked at things always like God is just everything that's around us. It's you, me, a blade of grass, a tree. It's everything. That's God. And more importantly, it's love. And I like that message because I think that holds true with everybody.
We've talked often when we've had these kinds of conversations about the quality of musicianship in this area. And I'm looking at the list of 3 of the players on here, and I've done podcasts with 2 of them. And Bernie's, I think, the only one I haven't sat down with yet.
He's a guy you got to sit down with.
Chris Jackson and Doug Vanderhoorden.
Yeah.
And it's amazing because I know that Chris Jackson has an album out, and so does Doug.
Yeah.
And it seems like everybody's playing on everybody else's album.
Yeah,
which is a good thing.
That's right. If it's needed or suited. When I worked with Doug, I think he was still working on his album at the time. And I told him, I said, if you need my services, I'm there for you. But I realized I heard, he'd played me a couple of his tunes, and I said, I'm not the guy for you for this album. Plain and simple.
Yeah.
And so no harm, no foul, Chris Jackson, I met him a couple of years ago, I think it was, and very huge in Kingston. And I think, as far as I remember, I was doing an interview on CJAI and had told the DJ that I'd written a song for Chris because he had posted something on Facebook about his alcoholism and how he'd quit drugs and alcohol, and it was very tearful, and I thought, man, that takes a lot of bravery to put that out there to people, but kudos for him. So anyways, the DJ said, oh, well, I had my guitar. Can you play this song? I played the song. He heard it on the radio. She sent it out to him. And we connected that way. And I asked him to play on the record. And, he said, sure, why not? So, But that's the Kingston community.
That's right.
We're all in the same game. And if it works, if that person works, then it's great. But if it doesn't, I can't play with every musician in town as much as I would love to.
You're not afraid to tell them that it's not going to work.
No.
Yeah.
No, they're not going to pick up their bag of marbles and run.
Yeah.
Nor am I. So I don't feel like I'm missing out if I'm not playing on Chris's album or Doug's. It's fine. We're all supporting each other. That's all that matters.
So have you started writing tunes for the next album?
Oh, yeah. I've already 4 songs into a new album. That'll be a Watkins harp album.
Yeah.
It never ends with me. I write songs every day. And posting them on social media, on Facebook, that's just something I like doing.
Yeah.
I sit in the comfort of my own home and spew out these tunes. And, if I get a few people that notice it, I'm happy. It's not a big numbers thing. It really isn't.
Playing for your wife and dogs.
It is. Yeah, that's what I'm doing now. Well, last time I talked to Kim Burley, we were talking about that, and he said, I think it's great. He said, you're writing these songs, and you're just happy putting them out there. And he said, just do that. Don't worry about, having them played on the radio stations or getting a recording contract. Be happy. And I said, I am. So he gets it, because same thing. When he played on my last album, solo album, I had actually written a song for the Stampeders. So I was pitching it to them. And he said, politely, no, sorry, he said, we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
We're doing all the old hits, and that's good for us, and we're happy. Yeah. So, but he was kind enough to say, listen, I'll play on your record if you want. I was over the moon with that. But again, he lives on the West Coast. Here I am on the East Coast. So now you just trade files. So you never actually get to be in the studio with him. Right. That's the way of the world.
Yeah, exactly. I was speaking with an artist who paints, and it's the same thing. And I was mentioning this to her when I was talking with her. The whole business of I have this idea in my head, and I have to get it out. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a song or a painting or whatever, or a script or writing something. It's just something that's in the head that has to come out, and whenever it comes out, at least you feel some sort of happiness that it is out.
Oh, yeah.
So and you can then share it with somebody else.
Yeah.
And
it's bigger than that, though.
Yeah.
Any artist, period, whether you're a sculptor, a painter, or a songwriter, a writer, I guarantee you that all of us have the same feeling, which is that it's channeled through us. We're a vehicle for this thing. There's so many times where when I sit down and write, it happens or it doesn't. You can't force it. But there are these moments that come along where you put pen to paper and you cannot write the words down fast enough, the lyrics. You're scrambling, you're putting them down, and boom, within a minute you've written this whole thing, and you've got the music, the melody, and you finish it and think, where did that come from? I could sit here and tell you I've written, thousands of songs, but I don't feel that way. I kind of feel like I was just smart enough to put pen and paper and let, whatever it was come through me and do it that way. So I always liked the comparison of, Michelangelo sculpted out of marble. And I believe it was him that said, it's the sculptor or the end product is already in there. I'm just taking away the pieces to reveal it.
Yeah.
That's the best description.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing what's in your head with the rest of us, and all the best going forward, in particular, all the best with respect to the new CD.
Oh, thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Rob. Rob Watkins was my guest in this conversation, recorded in June of 2024. For more information on his music, check out the liner notes to this episode. For those of you who have taken the time to listen, thank you, and I'll be back soon with another conversation.
The theme music for the podcast is Stasis Oasis, written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of the episodes, please send a note to thekingstonianpodcast@gmail.com. For details on upcoming guests, follow us on Facebook. The Kingstonian Podcast is hosted by Dave Cunningham and produced in Kingston, Ontario, Canada.